The mist never left the valley, not in summer, when the rye grew tall and gold like a crown of kings, nor in winter, when the frost clung to window panes like the desperate hands of forgotten souls. It was a quiet valley, cradled by the woods, older than memory and heavier than time. The people of Oilanspigel had always lived there, 53 souls in a crooked-limbed village that seemed to have sprouted from the very earth-like lichen-covered stones. And one morning in the winter of 1632, they were simply gone. A tax collector found it. Hans Brecht, a man of no imagination and fewer dreams. He arrived with ledgers in hand, a mule dragging behind him, and a list of names inked in brown across parchment that smelled faintly of mold and tithes. He expected resistance. The villagers had missed their dues again: wheat, salted pork, and 3 casks of mead gone unrecorded. But when he entered the village, his mule stopped, froze. Brecht cursed, kicked at the animal's ribs. Still, it wouldn't move forward. That was when he noticed the door. Open. Not just one, but every door. Unlatched, gaping like mouths mid-scream. The tables inside were set for breakfast, spoons half submerged in porridge. Fires still glowed in the hearths, low and sullen. A child's doll rested on the stoop of a cottage, one glass eye pointing west toward the trees. No blood, no struggle, no sign of a storm or banditry, just absence. He found all 53 homes like that. Brecht counted. He went into each one, calling out names: Marcus, Elias, Little Hildebert. No answer came. He searched the stables. Horses gone, save one, half-eaten in its stall. Eaten by what? He could not say. He wrote a report, tried to be precise, but the ink shook on the page. And later, when questioned, he whispered, they left together, all of them, into the woods. The Prince Bishop of Wurzburg sent a unit of soldiers, 10 men, led by Captain Oswald Reiter, a war-hardened man whose face had long forgotten how to express surprise. They arrived by torchlight, uncertain what they were investigating: heresy, plague, witchcraft. But Eulenspiegel offered no answers, just silence and a trail of footprints that led to the tree line and vanished. Not scattered, not rushed, a single file line, as if following something, as if summoned. The soldiers camped at the edge of the woods for 2 nights. They dared not enter. By dawn of the 3rd day, Captain Reiter gave the order: we say nothing, and nothing they did say. Officially, the Prince Bishop's scribes recorded it as a relocation during troubled times. But the soldiers spoke in taverns, after drink numbed their tongues. They told of a howling they heard from the forest, not wolves, not wind, a voice like water rushing through stone, whispering in Latin. One man tore out his own eyes the night he returned, muttering "Non videbus," again and again. You will not see. Years passed. The village was fenced off. Maps began to leave Eulenspiegel unnamed. Stories turned it into a legend, told by mothers to misbehaving children. Don't go into the woods. Don't answer the singing. But in the monastery at Bamberg, Brother Matthias began to investigate. He was old by then, bent like a sickle, with parchment skin and eyes that saw only what others feared. He'd heard tales of the village long ago, before he took the cloth. Now he read the records, Brecht's report, Reiter's silence, a faded map. But more disturbing were the letters. He found them buried in the diocesan archive, sealed with wax that had long since dried to dust. Letters from the village itself, from the schoolmaster, the blacksmith, the midwife. They dated back months before the disappearance, each one more frantic than the last. They spoke of strange dreams, of lights in the forest, of the moon rising in the wrong place, of the children whispering in tongues they hadn't learned. The last letter was from a woman named Martha Grunwald, the midwife. She wrote, "He comes when the moon is fat. He comes when the air turns to iron. He sings to the children, and they answer in kind. I've tried to warn them, but they look at me with eyes that no longer belong to them. Tonight, the trees will open. I hear them groaning. I fear they are ready to receive." Brother Matthias visited the place himself, in secret. The road to Eulenspiegel had long been overgrown, swallowed by vines and moss, but the foundations of the village still stood like tombstones, and in the woods he found a circle, carved into the earth, stone markers blackened by something older than fire. In the center, a totem made of teeth and bird bones, crowned with a lunar sigil. He did not stay long. He was a man of God, and his faith faltered that day. The church ordered him silent. The bishop feared unrest, and worse, curiosity. yet stories slipped out. A hunter claimed to see figures dancing in the mist. A merchant swore he passed by the valley and heard singing, soft and high, in a voice that mimicked his mother's. She spoke one word only: "He waits." By 1700, Eulenspiegel was no longer on any map. Travelers avoided the area entirely. The forest had grown thicker, darker, as though it were feeding on the memory of the village. Some said the trees moved, ever so slightly, when you looked away. He'd heard the legend from his grandmother, who wept every time the moon turned full. He laughed at it, at first, a bedtime story. Yet when he reached the area, he found something strange. Animals refused to cross into the forest. Locals would not speak of Eulenspiegel, and the trees, he wrote, seem older than the world, watching, waiting, patient. Adler found the circle that Brother Matthias had once described, though now overgrown. He unearthed part of the totem and took it home to study. That was when the dreams began, of a tall man made of bark and antlers, mouth stitched shut with silver thread, a moon that bled, a forest that moved. He documented everything, slowly descending into something between revelation and madness. His final note, written in charcoal on his cellar walls, read, "They walked into the song. It was not a forest, it was a gate." He died in 1823, clutching a bird's skull in each hand. The totem was never recovered. The forest did not end. That was the first sign something was wrong. When Jürgen Berg, a stonemason from a neighboring town, led a party of 6 men into the trees in the weeks after the disappearance, he expected to find signs of life. Within a day's walk, tracks, broken branches, a trail of children's feet, perhaps a shawl caught in the thorns. But by the 3rd day, their boots sank deeper into soil that had turned black and soft as if it drank light. On the 4th day, the trees grew closer together, their bark bleached white like bone, and the silence became unbearable. Even the birds refused to sing there. One man, Lucas the tanner, tore off his own clothes and fled into the brush, screaming that something was watching him from beneath the roots. They found him curled up hours later, eyes white with fear, and his mouth filled with moss. They turned back then, most of them. Jürgen lingered a moment longer before retreating. He claimed he saw something in the canopy, hanging between the trees like a body without a neck. It vanished when he blinked. After they returned, none of them spoke of the village again, not publicly. Whispers returned to the nearby towns. Rumors twisted themselves into prayers. Children were warned to keep away from the woods, and the name of the village Dronfeld was scraped off signs and records alike. Not erased, buried. But the story did not stay buried. In 1701, nearly 70 years later, a scholar named Elias Kuhn found a curious passage in a neglected ecclesiastical ledger stored beneath the crypt of a monastery in Bad Wimpfen. It was a record of a confession taken in 1659 from a nun who had reportedly broken her vows and descended into what the monk described as a frenzy of pagan speech. The transcript was fragmentary and smudged by moisture, but Kuhn copied what he could. They walked with lightless faces. They heard the humming beneath the stones. The trees made room for them. They walked until their names forgot them. Kuhn was fascinated. He dug further and began uncovering scraps mentions of a village that had ceased to tithe after 1632. Odd letters sent from worried relatives that went unanswered. Even a merchant's diary referencing a ghost village whose doors stood open, but whose hearths were cold. No fire, no bodies, only spoons half submerged in stew, and no one dared touch the food. He traced the name Dronfeld to an old imperial map, marked faintly in ink, faded like blood under a century of dust. The village sat on the edge of a forest, no longer named, merely shaded black, with a curling annotation in Latin, Silva Oblivionis, the forest of forgetting. That was when Kuhn made the mistake of going there. His journal entries, published posthumously by his assistant in 1712, began with enthusiasm. "Today, I set out for Dronfeld. The land is quiet, but it breathes beneath its stillness." Later entries became erratic. "I found bones hanging in the tree small, not animal. The forest rearranges itself. And then, finally, I no longer remember the faces of my children. I dream of mouths beneath the ground." He was found a month later by a tax collector, laughing, eyes scratched out. What made the villagers walk? Some said famine drove them mad, but grain stores were found full. Others whispered of plague, but no dead, no signs of illness. And those who knew the old stories remembered that Dronfeld had long been a place of strangeness. Lights in the woods, births that left infants with eyes already open and staring into the void. There had been, in the years before the vanishing, a sudden obsession with silence. The village church replaced hymns with wordless humming. A stone circle was erected near the forest edge, each rock carved with symbols not seen since the days before Christianity swept through the valleys. One letter, preserved by Kuhn, written by a traveler in 1629, described a sermon in the village square. The priest did not speak. He only stood there, mouth open. We heard nothing, yet all of us wept. Some historians dismiss it all as folklore exaggerations spun from the chaos of the 30 Years' War. After all, Germany was bleeding then, torn by mercenaries and kings, with villages razed and families scattered. But Dronfeld wasn't burned, it wasn't looted, it was left, untouched. And that is what terrified those who found it. By 1804, the land had been declared cursed and was legally forbidden from settlement by decree of the local duke. Yet tales persisted. Hunters reported lights hovering above the canopy. Children born nearby were said to speak languages no one could teach them. In 1833, a woodcutter named Unsolvedmysteries returned from the forest clutching a wooden doll carved in the likeness of a woman with no face. He left it by his daughter's crib. That night, his wife slit her own throat and wrote the word again on the wall in her blood. The forest did not end, and slowly, people began to ask not where the villagers had gone but what had called them. The name Dronfeld became synonymous not with tragedy, but invitation, a beckoning. It was said that if you stood on the edge of the trees during the solstice and whispered your name 3 times, you would hear your own voice whisper it back from the wrong direction. This was not mass hysteria, nor was it grief. This was resonance, as if something in the forest remembered the shape of human longing and simply made space for it. The trees, too close together for sunlight, the moss that swallowed sound, the wind that moved only when no one was watching. Every element of the land seemed tuned to a different key of reality, one that hummed with an ancient song the villagers, somehow, had known how to hear. Perhaps it was always their fate to go, not out of madness, but recognition. The tragedy then is not that they vanished, it is that they were the first to listen. By the 3rd day, the search had become a ritual of madness. Hans Dietrich, the stonemason who had once carved saints into the facade of the church, now wandered the forest edge barefoot, whispering his wife's name, blood dripping from his cracked heels. He hadn't spoken since the morning he found her bonnet tangled in the thorns, 20 feet from the village. The others feared to approach him not out of cruelty, but because he had begun to resemble something the forest might take. The magistrate from Nettridlingen arrived with 6 armed men, the kind who had once fought in wars and learned to survive by trusting what they saw, not what they felt. They entered the forest at dawn with dogs and muskets, scoffing at the hysteria. They returned by noon, silent and pale, dragging one of their Onyohan whose eyes had rolled white and whose tongue, they said, would not stop chanting the same word. Zurich. The priest, Father Albrecht, refused to translate the word to the villagers, but those who had lived near the old border with the Czech lands, those who remembered the strange dialects and older names for the woods, they already knew. Return, or more precisely, go back, but the village was gone. And so the only thing left to return to was the forest. In desperation, a council was held. Survivors from nearby towns gathered in the silent, gutted shell of the church. There was the sound of a bird fluttering somewhere high above the rafters, but no one dared to look up. The townsfolk spoke of Theory's plague, a mass hysteria, pagan cults resurfacing, but one voice cut through them all. Her name was Marga. She had not spoken since her own daughter vanished on a fog-thick morning in October, 17 years ago. But now she spoke, and when she did, her voice carried a weight that made even the magistrate bow his head. They were called, she said, like cattle to the bell. The forest remembers, and when it hungers, it sings. No one laughed, not even the rational men. The archives at ULM were consulted. A scholar named Elias Kramer, obsessed with pre-Christian rites, arrived weeks later bearing maps and trembling hands. He found records barely legible, soot-darkened scrolls from 1197 of a prior village built on the same land, called Blutbrandorf. The village of the Blood Spring, it had vanished, too. Only a bishop's letter remained, warning of an enchantment rooted beneath the black bow. The forest, he wrote, calls its tithe when the blood moon rises, thrice within a single year, and in 1632 it had Ilias traced the border of the forest on an ancient map, noting it had shrunk over the centuries, as if retreating. It does not lose territory, he whispered to Father Albrecht. It waits, it grows inward. But there was more. Deep in the archives, bound in human skin and inked with rust-colored script, was a journal legible at first, until placed under firelight. The author was unnamed, but their words etched madness across the page. They dance when the moon splits her jaw. They hum without mouths. The trees listen, the roots feed. I tried to watch, I tried, but the eyes ... The eyes were not their own. Elias, who had mocked the idea of curses, now spoke only in prayers. He left without his boots, muttering about hollow men, and the ash beneath the leaves. No one ever saw him again. Weeks turned to months. Snow blanketed the empty homes. Doors flapped open in the wind like tongues trying to speak. No animals entered the village, not a single fox, bird, or beetle, as if nature itself had drawn a line. Even the crows avoided the steeple. One night, as winter bled into spring, a fire started in the bakery. Flames rose high, but no one tried to stop it. They watched it burn, knowing the village was never theirs to begin with. When dawn came, only blackened stone remained, and in the ashes, a child's footprint, bare, delicate, pointing toward the woods. And so, in silence, the people of the region made a decision. The village would be struck from maps. No one would speak of it. Those who remembered would remember in nightmares, not words. The forest was sealed. Charms were nailed to trees, prayers stitched into every hem, and still, on certain nights, the wind carried a smell like sweet bread and iron, like laughter muffled under soil. But what of the villagers? Did they walk willingly into that whispering place? Or were they drawn, inch by inch, heart by heart, towards something older than their names? Father Albrecht believed he knew. In the final sermon he ever gave before he went mute and began carving crosses into his own arms, he said, "It was not a vanishing, it was a returning. The land remembers its own." Years later, a merchant passing through the region reported seeing shapes between the trees, tall, thin figures, watching from the dark. When asked to describe them, he said only, they looked like men, but their eyes were empty, like they'd forgotten how to look back. When he was told the name of the vanished village, he paled. "There is no such place," he said. "That name, I heard it in a dream once. My daughter was in it. She kept pointing to a well, but it was filled with teeth, and the forest, as always, said nothing." When the Prussian investigator Jakob Meisner finally reached the edge of the Schwarzwald, 3 years had passed since the vanishing of Dörflitz. The war had left the roads cracked and soaked in mud. The woods hung low like drapes over a forgotten stage, and the once clear paths were now swallowed by thickets and bramble, as though nature had deliberately erased every trace of the village's existence. Meisner did not expect answers. He expected madness, but what he found was far more disturbing. He was a man bound by logic, raised in courtrooms and archives, where parchment and seals carried more weight than rumor or song. And yet, as he stepped into the dense fog that clung like a second skin to the forest floor, even he felt the hush, a silence too heavy to be mere absence of sound. It was a presence, an ancient watching, as though something behind the bark and roots had been waiting, not for discovery, but for return. He reached the clearing where Dörflitz should have stood. It was not ruins he found, but a perfect circle of blackened grass. No structures, no debris, no bones, only the hint of a foundation, as if the earth had exhaled the memory of the village and buried its breath. At the center stood the well, sealed with a stone slab etched in crude, unfamiliar runes. No language Meisner recognized, yet he swore they pulsed faintly under his gaze. He took notes, sketched the markings, and did not speak of the low, rhythmic hum that seemed to come from beneath the stone, like breath drawn through wet soil. That night, he camped near the clearing. The fire gave no warmth. He dreamt of hands, dozens of them, pale, long-fingered, reaching from behind trees. A child whispered into his ear in a voice dry as parchment, "We are not gone, we have changed." He woke choking on dirt that filled his mouth, as if he had been trying to scream through earth. Back in town, his report was burned. The church called it heresy. He was told Dörflitz never existed. The maps were redrawn, and the road leading into the Schwarzwald was erased by decree. What remained of Meisner was found a year later in his home. Eyes gouged out, a circle of teeth placed reverently around his bed, and a note pinned to his chest in his own hand. The forest remembers. We should not bot long before Meisner's journey. Something else had stirred. In 1666, a traveling monk named Father Wenzel claimed in his dying confession that he had seen the villagers, not corpses, not ghosts, but people unchanged by time, standing silently at the tree line near Dörflitz's former location. He wrote, "Their eyes were empty, yet they wept. They wore no shoes and no shame. I asked them who they were. They replied in unison, 'We are the ones who stayed.'" His words were dismissed, his bones buried beneath 3 altars to ensure he would not walk again. But if you dig through the suppressed archives of the House of Wettin, there lies a forgotten folio, bound in bark, pages sewn with red thread. It holds sketches of a ritual long outlawed. At its center is an image of a tree with 12 roots and 12 mouths carved into the trunk. Beneath it, the caption reads, "The veil demands a tithe." No explanation, no author. But behind the image is a blot, a faint watermark shaped like the coat of arms of Dörflitz, scratched out with dozens of tiny cuts. Modern historians call the village a myth, a fairy tale whispered to keep children from wandering too far. But there is a pattern they never see. Every 300 years, the trees of Schwarzwald bloom blood-red leaves. In those seasons, animals disappear, birds refuse to nest, and those who go in, searching for legends, ghost hunters, thrill seekers, even archaeologists, never come back. A team from Munich in 1932 went into the forest with early radio equipment. For days, static. Then, on the 5th day, a transmission came through. A man's voice, hoarse, barely human, whispered, "We are not lost, we are waiting." No one could trace the signal. The team was never found. But the final piece comes from a woman named Lord Herschel, a child survivor from a village 10 kilometers north of where Dörflitz once stood. It took her years to speak again. When she finally did, she told only one story, over and over, like a prayer. They heard the song from the trees. They walked in. The trees closed behind them. I followed, but turned back. They did not. They sang as they disappeared. And then the woods forgot their names. Her words were dismissed as trauma-induced hallucination. But there's one final note. In 1971, during construction near the Black Forest's edge, workers unearthed a sealed chamber beneath the roots of a dead ash tree. Inside were 312 sets of teeth, no skulls, no bodies, arranged in a perfect spiral. At the center, a doll made of hair and ash, its mouth open, as if mid-howl. When examined, it crumbled into dust. But beneath it was a scrap of cloth, faded but still legible. It read, "To remember is to be taken. Forget, and you may yet live." No one speaks of Dörflitz anymore. Its name has been excised from every official record, its location renamed, the roads rerouted. But still, some locals whisper of strange songs heard at night from the woods, of lights that flicker behind the trees, of children who dream of villages they've never seen, and of a forest that calls not with rage, but with longing, a hunger as old as root and stone. Because what happened in 1632 was not an accident, nor a disappearance. It was a choice. The villagers of Dörflitz were not taken. They walked willingly into the trees, because something inside the forest offered them what the world could not: silence, eternity, and the end of pain. And perhaps that's the most terrifying truth of all. Not that they vanished, but that they never wanted to be found.